Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm going live for the second time today. But this time, rather than doing an expert live, I am going to be speaking to Amber Izzo, who is here now. She's one of our campaign ambassadors. So let me welcome her in and we can get chatting. This is a conception journey and also the campaigning that she's been doing to try and make IVF more fair. So it should be. There we go. Hey, Amber.
Hello, that's awfully close to my face, but it's going to have to do. Hello, are you all right?
I was about to start speaking and then you popped up. So I was like, okay, let's get you in. How are you today?
Not bad, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I mean, I was going to start by just saying a big thank you so much for you because you do so much for the community generally, and also you've been a fantastic ambassador for the Fertility Clinics versus COVID initiative that we're currently running for the free IVF and donor sperm. So thank you for that. And if anyone is joining who doesn't know about it, just head to fertilityhelphub.com to find out more and apply before the 10th of March. But also, as I've explained previously, over the course of this 8-week campaign, it's really important to be giving people, as well as the free offer of treatment, which is obviously amazing. It's important to be having these conversations with fertility experts about topics, but also people who are actually on the journey or who have been there. And obviously, for those who follow you, they know that you are currently on it and have been for a while.
Yeah.
And you posted today about how you've been feeling, you're having a difficult day today, and
Yes,
that totally comes with it, doesn't it? So
absolutely.
I appreciate you coming on tonight.
That's all right. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So do you want to start by talking a bit about how you started speaking openly about your journey, where you guys are at, and also the amazing campaigning that you've been doing yourself?
Yeah, of course. So we have been trying to conceive now for just over 6 years. So we kind of I don't know. I came off the pill just because I didn't like it. I'd been on it for far too long, and we just decided that we'd just kind of stop not trying, kind of thing, and just see where it took us. But after a while, obviously, things still hadn't happened. So eventually, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and a little while after that, I was then diagnosed with 2 fully blocked fallopian tubes, which I have since had removed. So IVF is quite literally our only option. But on top of that, my husband was diagnosed with low morphology. So we have to have ICSI as well. So because of where we live, we aren't entitled to any cycles of IVF whatsoever on the NHS. So everything has been privately funded. And we're now heading towards our 3rd cycle. So we've had a bit of a break. Our last cycle finished literally a few days into lockdown. So yeah, we are now kind of in the process of saving for the 3rd cycle. We're going with a new clinic and starting completely afresh. So that's kind of where we are with it. I suppose I've always been quite open with it. Like, I'm quite an open book anyway. I am somebody that will just kind of talk about anything to anyone. But for me, it made sense for me to be really open about it because I didn't know anyone else who was going through it. And for me, talking is the best therapy. I think I have to talk about things to get them off my chest. And if I just sit on things and don't talk about it, it quite literally eats me up, and I don't know what to do with myself. So it made sense for me to just talk about it. So that's what I did. And in that process, kind of started a blog, which has kind of just led me to here, if you like. But with regards to the campaign, I started the campaign Fight for IVF for free and equal treatment and access to IVF across the country, because it is I can't even think of the word, like, it's so unjust the way that it's set out across the country. So like I say, where we live, we aren't entitled to any cycles whatsoever, which is
Where do you live?
I'm in Cambridgeshire.
Yeah.
So
was that a shock when you found that out? Like, how did that play out for you 6 years ago, if that's when you started looking into IVF?
So we didn't start looking into IVF until 2019, as that was when I was diagnosed. Like, until then, we just thought that maybe I wasn't ovulating. Like, we didn't quite realise the full extent of the issues at that point. So a couple of years earlier, it was 2017 that they took it off the NHS. So it was already like in our local news at that point. I think I knew that by that point, we were 2 years in, and it had started to kind of, it was on my mind that this is perhaps the route that we needed to go down, and things were starting to become quite obvious that it wasn't going to be textbook for us. So we already knew that it wasn't on the NHS, but they were going to review it in 2019. And that's when we were diagnosed. So we decided to wait. Well, we were diagnosed in 2018, sorry. So we were waiting to see whether or not they were going to reinstate it before we went down that route and started looking at clinics, etc. So we put off actually having IVF for about 8 months while we waited for them to see whether or not they would reinstate it. And they postponed the meeting about 3 times. So we thought it was looking quite positive because MPs had got involved. But they decided they weren't going to reinstate it. So that was just, it wasn't very nice, because you know that if we live 10 minutes away,
Really?
quite literally 10 minutes away, then we'd be entitled to at least 1 cycle.
Do you know why it was taken off your area?
Funding. So they said it was completely down to funding. They were in a deficit. And they said that they couldn't afford it. It's less than 0.01% of their budget. So that's where I get really, really angry about it. And they also claim that it has no impact on their mental health services. And I could argue them to the contrary for days. But that was why they decided to remove it. But they're only one of 3 CCGs in the whole country that don't offer any. There's Basildon and Brentwood and Mid-Essex. And they're the only other 2 that don't offer anything at all. So yeah, it's not a great situation to be in, but
I'm so sorry.
it's the place we've landed on. So it is what it is, and we battle through.
So, because you were very kindly in the launch film for the Fertility Clinics versus campaign that I've just launched, talking a bit about your journey. If people want to watch that back, it's on my page, this page. But you mentioned that obviously lockdown happened, and you just found out that cycle hadn't happened. So that was that a year ago then, in March?
Yes, yeah, end of March was when our last cycle failed. Yeah.
And did you decide to like have a pause because you wanted to rethink, as you mentioned, clinic and situation versus having delayed treatment because of COVID?
Yeah, there was a few different reasons. I think we did 2 cycles in a short space of time. And both, like, it wasn't just a case of we had the transfer and then it didn't work. Like the first time we didn't have anything to transfer at all. None of the embryos made it. And then the second time we only had 1 to transfer, but it wasn't a full blastocyst at that point. It was growing really slowly. So for us, the outcomes hadn't been great at all. And clinic was a huge thing for us. We knew that we wanted to move clinic. But we'd also kind of, like I say, we'd gone into lockdown, so we didn't really know what the situation was there. We didn't know when we were going to be able to start again. I felt like I needed a break from my mental health massively. But on top of that, it's the finances. Like we were putting everything that we had into this, that we ran out of money. So we knew that we needed a break. We knew that we wanted to, our plan was to enjoy life for a little while, but we didn't know that we were going to be stuck in our own 4 walls for the next year. So that was the plan. But now we've kind of picked up again. We've found a clinic that we like, that we are feeling quite confident in. And yeah, so now it's just a case of save that money and get to a point where we're ready to start.
I don't know if you know, but for this campaign or recently, we ran a poll to see how people had been, or a survey to see how people had been affected by COVID, especially in the UK. And 100% of those that took part said that they had had their mental health affected. And 67% said that they're putting themselves under serious financial strain to go privately because of, you know, lack of resources or wait times. And that's just such a huge amount of people like yourself, isn't it, who are being forced, I know yours is for different reasons with the NHS postcode lottery, but being forced into a situation where it just doesn't feel fair. And it's so hard, isn't it, as you would well know, especially when you see pregnancy announcements or friends who just fall pregnant easily and you're like, you don't understand stress and like the mental well-being and the financial pressure that some people have to put themselves through for things that can come so easily to other people. It's just so unfair.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I completely kind of understand, obviously, why people end up getting themselves in so much debt for it. Like, it's not cheap at all. At the end of the day, I think I always try to remember that as much as clinics, a lot of them obviously want the best for us and they want the positive outcomes, etc. At the same time, they are businesses and they're there to make a profit. And it's an extortionate amount of money. And I think we have been quite disciplined with where we've got our money from. And we kind of drew a line at, well, I say we, my husband drew the line at us getting loans and things like this, purely on the basis that because of our history with it and because of how badly they failed, if you like, that we resent the idea of paying something off for the next 5 years that we haven't got. And then at the same time, it's like, to us, it was a bit like, oh, we don't want to pay for feel like you're quite literally paying for the baby, if that makes sense. Yeah. So he's very disciplined financially, whereas I'm not. And I'd have very easily gone, right, let's get all the credit cards, let's do this, that, and the other. Whereas he is very, very much, no, be sensible. So I'm very lucky to have him because I'd have gone mad, which isn't ideal, or a thing you should probably admit on the internet. But
have you found this year really hard, just having to wait and save up?
Yes and no. I think I needed it. I think I really, really needed that break. And I think in some ways lockdown did help with that, because when it failed, we weren't, like, usually we'd have seen family and people would have come round and things like that, and I'd have had to talk about it. Whereas it was somewhat a bit easier for me, because if I didn't want to talk about it, I could put my phone down, and if someone texted me and said, oh, how are you doing, and XYZ, I could quite literally not reply for 6 hours until I was feeling a bit better, and I was in the headspace to reply properly. So that for me benefited some ways. But it has been harder because I think we've not been able to do the things that we wanted to do on our break. So the whole point of this, that we were going to just enjoy the time just being us away from that, and we haven't been able to. And as a result of that, I've been kind of stuck with my own thoughts, which sometimes makes it worse, because usually if I'm not feeling great, I'll text my friend, like, should we go for a glass of wine, something like that.
There's nothing to look forward to.
No, exactly. So it's definitely made it a lot harder. It's made it harder to save, definitely. My husband's a hairdresser, so he's not been able to work. So yeah, it's been very difficult. But at the same time, there are certain things that I am grateful for as a result of it. So yeah, it's definitely been a mixed bag, and it depends on the day to the answer, to be honest.
And for people who aren't yet following you, what I love about your posts is the honesty, and it must resonate with so many people, because I read your posts and I'm like, yes, you have literally nailed it in terms of the sentiment that comes with it. I think you poured your heart out and talked about a diagnosis. Was it last week maybe? And how you literally just went and got drunk and just got into a hole, and there was just no way of coping with that frustration and that anger. And I've been there too, and it's so hard to try and explain to other people who may not have been in that situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I don't like to sugarcoat things, and I am very much, I say it how it is. I've always been like that. I think I'm well aware that sometimes how open I am makes some people feel uncomfortable. People that haven't been through it. We have friends who have said that, and they've said, it makes me feel uncomfortable how open you are about it. But for me, I'm very much like, I don't care. This is my life, and this is what I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And if that makes you uncomfortable because of my misfortune, then that's kind of your issue, not mine. And I don't see the point in sugarcoating things, and I don't see the point in beating around the bush. And if I feel a certain way, I'm going to say I feel that way, because when I first started going through this and I would look for things, everything was always so positive, which isn't a bad thing. But there was always, the whole never give up narrative and things like this. Whereas I find that to be quite toxic. And I don't like that. And when I found out that I was infertile, and when I found out that I needed IVF, I really did go on such a downward spiral, and it was quite scary where I ended up. And I don't think people quite talk about that. People talk about how it's hard, etc. But I don't think many people will admit that they've sat on their kitchen floor in absolute floods of tears, throwing dining room chairs around the room. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
people don't want to admit that. People don't want to admit their most vulnerable side. And I think there's an element of shame to that I think the way I see things is that the stigma is never ever going to be removed, and it's always going to be a taboo unless people talk about it. And people preach about talking about mental health and things like that. And I think, well, do it. There's no point sitting there and saying, oh, you should talk if you're not going to. So
I
for
think
me,
the other
I
thing
just
as
therefore,
well, yeah, totally. I think the other thing as well is like, I'm sure you've talked about this, I've talked about this before. Things can look rosy on the outside for people, and then behind closed doors, you don't always know what's going on, do you? So
100%.
what you see on the outside, what you see on social media, isn't necessarily a reflection of how people are feeling or where they actually are.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think people quite often will message me and say, like, about me and Marco and how like how strong our relationship is and things like that. But it takes a lot of work for us to stay the way we are. And like I say in the post I did the other day about when I had a breakdown, and when that happened, I really did sit there and tell him to leave me and quite literally beg him to go, and told him I wanted a divorce because of how awful this made me feel. And I felt like I was dragging him down and things like that. And there are times where I'm really struggling, and he's a lot more reserved than I am. He has much better coping mechanisms than I do, and he's quite capable of shelving things and putting them to the back of his head, whereas I can't do that. So it does take an awful lot of work for us to keep our relationship strong during all this, because it is so easy. I think it really does have such an impact on your relationship that things aren't always rosy and nice and shiny on the outside. So for me, I will put that on Instagram, because I don't think it's right for people to think that everything is wonderful all the time when it's not. It's really hard.
And that's what I think can be reassuring for people to read or hear, because it shows them, or certainly shows me, that you're not alone in those feelings, and that's totally
Absolutely.
normal, and that can be okay. And it's nothing to feel ashamed of.
Yeah,
And
100%.
what about family? How have family been over the 6 years?
I mean, initially we didn't really tell anyone. A few of my friends knew that we were trying. But to be honest, I didn't tell anyone until we started having our investigations. So I think it came as quite a shock to people, because there was never any talk of us having children. And then suddenly, I think my father-in-law knew, but like that was it. So then suddenly I was having a laparoscopy, and everybody was a bit like, where's this come from?
Yeah.
But yeah, they were, I mean, when I got my diagnosis and found out that we needed IVF, like both of our families were absolutely fantastic. And they were so supportive, and you saw a side to your family that I think you don't really see anywhere else. Like for my dad, for example, like I don't talk about my family that much online, but my dad's quite a reserved person, and my dad does not do emotion. If you don't talk about a problem, the problem doesn't exist. And yet this really affected him, and he was really hurt for me. So they have been great, but I think it's difficult, because quite often people don't know what to say. And I think unless you've been through it, it's quite hard to empathize with that, and it's quite hard to know what to say. And I talk again about toxic positivity, of people like the never give up and things like that. And I think people say these things, and your family say these things, and your family don't know what to say, but they try. And I think that's all I can ask for, really. I think I'm very lucky to have a sister who is just there whenever I need her to be there. So yeah, we have been very lucky with how supportive our family have been. But I think sometimes it is hard to convey just how much of an effect it has, if they've not been through it.
Definitely.
I don't think they quite get it.
Definitely. And for people who might be watching this and perhaps starting investigations or treatment, is there anything that you have kind of like learnt or advice that you might be able to give from your own personal experience over the last 6 years?
I think one thing I kind of repeat all the time is that you have to take everything one step at a time, and you can't control what is going on. Like you can't control your diagnosis, you can't control your body, you can't control obviously what the test results are going to say, etc., etc., and that can be really hard. My advice is always to talk. It's not for everybody. Some people do want to go through this privately. For me, that's the worst thing I could have done. So my advice is always talk, whether that's to your mum, whether that's to your best friend, like whoever that is, find someone external that you can talk to. I think that lack of judgment and somebody that isn't directly involved, for me, that was really important. I also
Because
think that
sometimes,
go on.
sorry, sometimes, and I certainly found this, I don't know if you find this with Marco as well, that it's hard to talk to the person you're trying to have a baby with if you're having a baby, if you know, if you're trying as a couple,
100%.
because you might have different feelings at different times or different ideas about when to do things or not to do things, like you said about the finances, and it can make it so pressured on the relationship.
100%. And I think it's you're on the same journey, but you're also on completely different paths. Like you're both at different points, in the sense that like I say, my husband's quite capable of putting things in a box and dealing with it when he needs to deal with it, whereas I can't do that. But at the same time, I'm the one that's the reason we need IVF. And so the feelings for me are very different to what they are for him. And I'm the one that carries the baby and births the baby. And so for me, there's not just the grieving of the having the baby, there's the grieving of the pregnancy. And that for me is a really huge thing. So we're quite often on very different pages about how we feel about it, and things that people say to me that trigger me sometimes, in the sense that, like, when people ask us about alternative routes and things like that, sometimes that will completely set me off. And things that quite often in this community, we see a lot of people, like, what not to say to people who are going through IVF and things like that. Things like that really affect me, whereas they don't so much him, because he can see that like, obviously people never say things, or never very often
They
say
don't mean that, they
no,
don't mean hurtful.
that's it. It's never ill-intended. But for me, that's still enough to send me sideways, whereas he is quite capable of just going, okay, and moving on, and just going, they didn't mean it. So yeah, we're on the same journey, but we're on different paths, if you like, and just occasionally we cross over. And he is an absolutely great support, but our feelings are very different, because it's a different experience for us both. He's not the one that has to inject himself full of drugs every day. So the hormones aren't a thing for him. So it's very different, but it is obviously just as hard for him as it is for me.
Do you know when you're starting your next round?
We're hoping, well, the plan is September. We're hoping potentially a little bit earlier, but we're not 100% sure. We have to repeat quite a few tests at the end of March, April time. And then it kind of depends how they come back as to whether or not we need other tests, etc. So we're just playing it by ear at the moment, but hopefully September, she says. But we'll see. We'll see.
Okay, but you've got a date in mind. That's getting a step closer again, isn't it, from where you've been? And sorry, I interrupted you before. I think you had a couple of last bits of advice for anyone who might be new to this. Which I interrupted you before. So if you mind just finishing with those, that'd be awesome.
I can't remember what I'd said. Oh yeah, so I'd said about the one step at a time, didn't I? But I think the other thing is just not being too hard on yourself. I think I went through my first cycle and was like, right, that's it. I can't drink, I can't eat anything that's got any ounce of anything in it. And I just think, don't be too hard on yourself. I think there's certain things that you can take and that you can implement, but you also have to kind of take everything with a pinch of salt.
You also have to have a life, don't you?
Exactly. It's hard enough without restricting everything that you ever do. So for me, it's take things with a pinch of salt, and you know what's right for you. You know what changes are reasonable for you to be able to do. You change everything, you're going to be miserable. And if you're miserable, it just makes everything so much worse. You're going to be tired and aggy and all the rest of it. But yeah, so just take everything with a pinch of salt and do what's right for you, and just remember that you can only control what you can control.
I love that.
Yeah, definitely one step at a time.
Has anyone got any questions for Amber since we've been chatting? I think there may have been a couple of things about possibly your campaign and like the IVF.
Oh, okay.
Are you able to say a little bit more about it? Like you mentioned, it's due to funding and the areas that don't have it, but is that the same for some areas that might have 2 rounds or 3 rounds? Like how, I just don't understand how it's, you know, spans from 0 to maybe 3.
Yeah, so you have the NICE guidelines, and then the NICE guidelines are kind of filtered down to the CCGs, and the local CCGs effectively decide how they want to implement it. So certain CCGs will fund 3 cycles in line with the guidance. Others will do 2, others will do 1, others will do 0. And they also vary in terms of their eligibility. So for some people, you have to have a certain BMI. For some people, you have to be a certain age or be under a certain age. It's some counties, or well, most counties, if your partner has children from a previous relationship, you can't access IVF on the NHS. And that, again, is against the NICE quality statement. So
And same-sex couples can't either.
yeah, so like quite literally the CCGs can take the guidance and in a nutshell do what they want with it. So the campaign, we're campaigning for effectively free equal treatment for everybody across the board, rather than it varying based on your postcode. So far it's done a lot better than I anticipated. I think we're near to, if we've not exceeded, I think we're near to 30,000 signatures now.
Wow.
We've had,
How long's that been over?
since fertility week, so since November.
Gosh, that's amazing. 30,000.
30,000. So it's done. It's definitely done well. We've had a cross-party. So in Cambridgeshire, all 7 MPs in the county wrote a cross-party letter to the CCG, and they, when they removed it, basically said it was non-negotiable, and that was it. It was gone. But they have now agreed to review it again at the end of the financial year. So we've made progress there. We've now got the MP for Bishop Auckland. We've just had a meeting with her, and she is going to try and echo the same. So where she is in Durham, you are entitled to 3 cycles, but the criteria is stricter in terms of like previous children, etc., etc. So she's taking it to the CCG in hopes that she will also get a cross-party letter. So it's definitely heading in the right direction. I think we've definitely got further than I've known it get before in terms of CCG involvement. So we're quite happy. Well, we're very happy with how far it's got so far.
When are you anticipating to know whether it's going to make a difference or not?
I don't know, because I think it's a mammoth task. If you think how many CCGs there are in the country, like it's massive. Cambridgeshire, we are hoping to have a meeting with the CCG before April, before the end of the financial year, and then we're hoping that they will review it around that time. So I don't want a meeting too early. I'd like a meeting quite close to when they review it. And
then obviously we've had so much going on with Brexit and COVID. That hasn't helped, has it? No,
definitely not. It definitely hasn't been great timing with everything, but then at the same time I think, well, when is the right time?
Exactly.
You know, campaigns like this have happened before, before Brexit and before COVID and everything else. So for me now, I just thought, well, there's no time like the present, and if I'm not going to do it, then who else is? So just sod it, give it a go.
Are you doing it with anyone else?
So my friend Hayley has been involved with it. It's predominantly been me on my own, really, but yeah, I've had support here and there, but yeah, I've been very much a one-man band for the majority.
Amazing. You should be so proud.
I am. I think it's one of those things where it's quite surreal, and I'm quite often like, I feel like I'm very out of my depth and thinking, who am I to do this? And then I just give myself a bit of a smack and carry on with it. And so yeah, it's, you know, I'm one person, but I think so far I've definitely made a bit of a wave, so I'm hoping that it continues that way.
That's brilliant.
But we'll see.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight, Amber, because I know that it's been a tough day, so I appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else does who's watching. And for those who have joined and don't know about it, Fertility Help Hub has teamed up with 7 fertility clinics and a sperm bank around the world to offer free IVF or donor sperm to those that can, well, to 8 couples or individuals who will be selected at random in March. So to help those, we can with just a little bit during this really, really crappy time. So if you want to find out more or apply and you haven't yet done it, there is still time. Just head to fertilityhelphub.com. The link is in the bio. And Amber, thank you again for being an ambassador for it and for sharing your story and talking to us about your amazing fight for IVF as well. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been
All
great.
right. Thanks everyone for
All
joining.
right.
Have a good evening.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.